So more information based on that 1996 Pokemon Pokedex that was only released in Japan. It was 143 pages. Well, apparently I managed to find some more information about it in Japanese. So back in 1996, apparently Professor Oak gave at some point gave a presentation or a lecture to the Celadon College or something like that. And so what ended up happening was he actually talked about how he used to believe in Darwinism, like the natural law of Pokemon was based on like natural selection and Darwin's laws in real life too. As well as, he talked about how like a Pokemon, the invention of the Pokedex, the invention of the Pokeball, and eventually the information would include how how the Pokemon even got their names based on like the species they were, the typings they were. And it's some very interesting stuff. Like it's not like something that, we haven't already been able to figure out, like if you really think about it. But it is interesting to see like how much data was released outside of Japan. But some of the stuff, because it is Pokemon, some of the stuff does go for a lot of money because they don't make this stuff anymore. So, but if anybody can get their hands on this stuff, it's actually really interesting. See what we've been missing all this time. So basically, this is what I gather. So Professor Oak was a Pokemon professor that obviously was a lot more of a trainer, was a hell of a trainer, let's be honest. Probably even stronger than his original grandson. Professor Oak was very good friends with, Agatha, and she could never beat him. And Agatha was the Elite Four member. So, so how strong was Professor Oak? Where did he get his superior knowledge from? Based on his experiences and what he studied. So, and if you think about it, that makes a lot of sense too. I think that Pokemon, as far as Pokemon goes too, the Pokedex, the lectures that he gave, the amount of knowledge that he obtained, Professor Oak was also maybe a champion at one point. Like he made it that far. And he was an overachiever, like Red was, obviously accelerated in what he did, always wanted to know what he didn't know, wanted to know everything somehow. And so what happened was we ended up finding out that Professor Oak even admitted at one point that even with the invention of the Pokedex that, he believed that those weren't all the Pokemon that existed. He believed that there were a lot more out there that still existed. I mean, and even as Pokemon goes on, like even games when they give you like the National Dexter, they do mention that. They do mention how recently there have been more Pokemon that have been discovered within this area. But like maybe no one had ever seen some of the, but they might have been Pokemon that have always existed. They just like migrated from like a different, the Hoenn region could be migrated from like the Johto and the Kanto region, and then like the Sinnoh region would have like later on have like stuff like that would eventually find their way that way, and depending on what type it was and what season it was, depending on if the game even had that kind of thing. It kind of like in real life, animals are always moving around, and some of them, depending on who they are and what they're after, will go and do what they feel like doing, Maybe some animals never leave their territory, but like, let's say they remember where their home is, so they'll stick around. Or maybe there's a Pokemon that, flies to stay in warm areas because they don't like the cold climate, and they're willing to fly miles south before they go back home north. Definitely true over here where I live in Michigan, for example. You'll have tons of Pokemon that they would do the same thing, like even birds in real life. There's some birds that you'll never see here in the wintertime, but like then there's some birds that are from other states that you most likely would see here that, like one of my favorites is the cardinals, the red cardinals. But you don't see them here for the most part. But, come like the wintertime, I mean, they're like the state bird of Ohio, for example, which is like a borderline state. And but you'll see them here sometimes. There's some of them that stick around here, but mostly you find them in other states though, because that's where originally they're from. But with different migrations and different, you can find anything anywhere if you really look hard enough, or maybe you just got to be at the right place at the right time and be able to identify certain things. But it is interesting though, nonetheless, what you can find. So it's like the same thing with Professor Oak, sort of. He states that, he learned a lot of stuff based on his experiences, and he kept putting himself out there to the point where he learned even more. And even as time went on, not only just that, but he learned that his history would also be recorded so that way others would be able to eventually see it. And so that's why he got where he was at, was because he believed all the lectures that he, you know, all the information he had, he made a lot of progress in. And especially with the Pokedex, you know, it was based on all his own research and all that. You know, he had completed a Pokedex and he knew a lot about these Pokemon, that, which is why he even knew, like, it's even more proof that he even knew about the existence of like Articuno, Zapdos, Moltres, Mewtwo, and even Mew. You know, Mewtwo and Mew obviously being more rare than the 3 legendary birds, but let's just assume that let's even assume that we'll go one step further and say that this is when, you know, there was more than one legendary bird. Some of the legendaries, obviously, there are probably only one of, but, you know, or maybe not. Maybe there's an infinite number of them in infinite dimensions. But like in the dimension that we see, there's only so many of them. We can only see, not because they're so rare, but, you know, they're just, you know, we only see them. We only find so many of them at a certain location, and then we got to be sure we catch the right one, so that way we're not getting screwed out of it. But again, if you don't know this, Pokemon originally was supposed to be like you could catch more than one legendary bird at that location, but it wasn't like what was known as a static encounter. It was kind of like a roaming sort of legendary, but in that one room though, depending on the room that they were in. You know, kind of like, you know how like the wild encounters work in Pokemon, you know, depending on the room you're in, depending on the Pokemon, has a certain encounter rate, what does the Pokemon do? You know what I mean? So you'd walk around until you find it eventually. And that actually was kind of interesting how they implemented that. I can't say for sure, you know, what made them want to change their mind about doing that. I always believed it was because they probably thought, well, you know, at some point, like they were doing the same thing with Mewtwo, and then they thought, well, maybe there's only one Mewtwo, because again, Mewtwo was man-made. It wasn't created in the, you know, it was a genetic code, unless they breed Mewtwo's, but then they would probably make more sense that it would be a man-made sort of Pokemon, but maybe not though either. So, but anyways, yeah, that would explain why Giovanni could only find one Mewtwo and nobody else could get their hands on it if there was such a thing. But Giovanni never even got his hands on Mew either, so that's kind of interesting as well. But he did get his hands on the legendary birds though, because he probably figured out where you could catch multiple ones of those. So that's actually kind of interesting. Again, this was back when Giovanni was still a flying type trainer. Imagine that, huh? So it'd be interesting. It'd be like even fighting like the Rainbow Rockets, and you know, if you remember how that was in like Gen 7 and all that, you know, imagine him using all 4 like legendaries and all that versus, and then you had like the Mewtwo at the end he used. I mean, it's like, dude, how many legendaries does Giovanni need? But, you know, but of course legendary birds can be taken out very easily, but that'd just be interesting to see that though, like how many Pokemon you can really implement like that though. So anyways, but yeah, but I do think that going back to like the whole, like a lot of the stuff about Professor Oak though, I do believe that like the way Pokeballs work is they were mechanically created by the Silph Co, so that way you could create and you could catch, like bring them with you and all that. Put him in another dimension. Kind of like how in like Jimmy Neutron, for example, how he had like that hypercube. You know, he was able to take stuff, put it in another dimension, carry it with him whenever he wanted to, and then he'd just pull it out whenever he needed it. And it's like the same thing with, what is it? It's like the same. It was like the same thing with, you know, and then they did the same thing with not Pokeballs, but, you know, and then they wanted to create the Pokedex. It would create like the information of the Pokemon, scan the Pokemon, and be like, this Pokemon is, you know, this is what this Pokemon is and who it is, using like, you know, kind of like infrared technology to be able to identify the Pokemon, and cellular mitosis and all that, cellular like data it was using. Some sort of frequency, rather, to identify the Pokemon based on its physical genetics and whatnot. Very interesting indeed. So Pokemon, they actually live in a very, very futuristic style of Pokemon, you know, the stuff they were creating and whatnot. So not only that, but they also created the like how they got the Pokemon names and all that was basically based on like their, you know, the species name and based on their location and their typing and all that. So like Spearow, for example, a good example. It's a sparrow that obviously is a flying type. And then it would evolve into Fearow because, you know, it's a Pokemon that's fearless, sort of. So you can sort of see where they kind of, like, you know, they kind of got their names for it too, based on the kind of animal it is and, you know, what is the Pokemon's characteristics. And I'm sure there's other ways too, but this is just to kind of name some of them. This is how I figured it out anyway. Or like Mew and Mewtwo, for example. Mewtwo is like this one's another obvious one. Mew is based on, you know, it's obviously a cat, but and then the cat makes a meow noise, but then you also had they call it Mew, and then, you know, of course, Mewtwo came along because it was a clone of Mew. So obviously Mew's the first one, Mewtwo's the second one, and then all of a sudden, you know, you see where they're kind of getting those. Some Pokemon are just easier to figure out than others. But I do believe there's a lot more to it than just that. It wasn't just based on the characteristics of the Pokemon and the typing, but more or less like what kind of Pokemon it was, how they came up with it, where you would find it, and maybe the characteristics of the Pokemon too. So could be anything really, but it's all based on its origins rather. So it's interesting figuring out like how the game designers created the stuff, more or less at the same time, how they even wrote it into the story, like kind of like with a similar idea. So that way the characters that are fictional it's like a play on words, you know, how they figured it out too, sort of. So like the story we see, you know. So that's pretty clever though. So again, subscribe if you're not already. If I find any more information, I'll try to update you on everything I can. But as of right now, this is probably a good place to stop for now.